Brennan Utley is an emerging author based in Austin who blends realist, fabulist, science fiction, and satirical traditions. He teaches English in Bastrop. Please welcome Brennan Utley.
This is really cool because I met Alisar 3 years ago, and I've gotten to do a reading for her every year she's published a book. So this is our third year of the trilogy, so it's very sweet. Anyways, I'm glad to be here. Also, I've just recently started like a little newsletter blog-ish thing, so if you like my work or like what you hear, find me. I've got a little list I can put your name down. This is from work in progress called The Spectacle of History. Rasping shouts swell from the crowd. Boots stomp atop metal risers. Flesh glints under the bright lights. Saliva and sweat collects together into a deep patterned heartbeat that rushes across the echoing space of the stadium, reverberating off the walls and back upon itself with impassioned vibration. The crowd is thirsty for the thickness and redness of blood. They are here for the despot of destruction, the tyrant of torture, the well-known entertainer and showman Horatio Freely. Infamous for the wondrous displays of violence and degradation he collects together for his crowd's amusement during his popular spectacle, the show. Horatio sits in his dressing room meditating, trying to merge his individual thoughts with those of the mob outside, to blend himself completely with their mental and bodily needs. He thrives on this connection. His show, The Show, is a meticulously crafted live event, an unmistakable product of deep premeditation and forethought, though this touch of quality is also admittedly lost on many of the show's viewers. Their eyes will end up glued to their arm screens and their voices will erupt across the arena, whether the show is well crafted or not. They're in it for the blood. Horatio understands that torturing the living in front of a live audience is a sacred and difficult task. He understands this better than anyone. No one else can make events of this kind feel as real, new, raw, and spontaneous. Horatio knows how to take such commonplace and repetitive acts and make them feel alive and unique, to make them feel like it's the first time you've ever seen them. Of course, Horatio's crowds have always been easy to please. No matter what he does, they're guaranteed to tune in for the violence and intensity of the moment, and yet for him, this never seems to be enough. He wants their screams to reach cataclysmic, almost spiritual levels. He wants his rhetoric to bring them out of themselves and into the palm of his hands. He is exceptionally ambitious as a host, a true innovator. It has been this way for quite some time. Not only was he the first to suggest that holographic extended selves be used in the show's festivities, but he was also the first to suggest that specific graphic artists design and sponsor these torturing holograms interfaces, making them into more ghastly and horrific creatures, and therefore making their terror and brutality that much more menacing for both their audiences and their victims. On the show's first run, its viewership skyrocketed to the position of the #1 spectacle in the colony. This happened almost immediately, and has remained in this position ever since. Despite his unbridled success, it is still common for Horatio to experience certain feelings of inadequacy. He wants more than anything to be the best spectacle artist that he can be, and has accomplished this in many cases, but the show's terror and violence is never enough for him. He still longs to push the program to the next level, past his viewers' expectations, past their levels of comfort and experience. In order to come up with ideas for these sorts of ambitions, Horatio reads histories. He is an avid and obsessive history reader, and is particularly fond of the more violent narratives he can find within their rarely read passages. They help to give his presentation an intelligent and linguistic quality that draws his audience in more than they are aware of. Spectacles have entirely replaced their much more literary histories, and yet it is incontrovertible that Horatio's culture also still contains at least a small amount of interest in language. Otherwise, Horatio's success wouldn't exist at all. It's there somewhere, if one is willing to look for it. As he sits and meditates, his eyes fall on a specific history, nuclear fallout in the 23rd century, written by the mostly unknown historian Benjamin Fallon. He's begun reading this particular history a number of times and especially loves its description of a nuclear plant in the pre-American state of Ohio, exploding and sending out nuclear material that burns through the skin of its victims, forcing men, women, and children to writhe in the streets, screaming for mercy as their flesh oozes from their bones and onto the Ohioan pavements. These are the sorts of historical narratives that Horatio was attracted to. And what never ceases to amaze him is that there are so many narratives of this kind to be found. Literally almost every history he picks up off the shelf is full of this same gore and bloodlust. These are the kinds of images that he keeps in his mind as he strides out of his dressing room to face the bellowing crowds that threaten to tear themselves and the stadium apart if he doesn't satisfy their sanguinary needs. Only the show can keep them under control. Although histories are viewed as fictional accounts by Horatio's culture, he can intuitively sense that true history, the real, now distant and forgotten past that lingers behind them all, is full of the same violence and bloodshed that the show celebrates. This is simply undeniable. There is a knock on his door. It is showtime. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice over the loudspeaker addresses, "I give you your Baron of Bloodshed, your Governor of Gore, the King of Carnage himself, Horatio Freely." Once his name is announced, the crowd's obstinate screeching erupts even further. They are screaming with everything they have, but even still, every eye in the stadium, as well as millions of other eyes all around the American colony, are fixed on Horatio in heated anticipation. His opening monologues can sometimes be just as satisfying as the bloodshed itself. "Good evening, folks," he begins. "I was sitting in my dressing room preparing for this glorious event, and I was thinking about traitors, about scoundrels, about all the selfish scum and slime hidden in the shadows, too cowardly to face the light of day, to face the simple truths that this peaceful society upholds. I remembered that today we force them to face that truth. Today we have them step up into the light to face the inevitable demise of their decisions. On some days you may question the work we do here. You may wonder if this spectacle is too violent for a peaceful society such as our own, but think about this. Were it not for these traitors, for these inhuman and un-American terrorists and destructors, we would not be collectively surrounding this throne of blood of which we now kneel. And until these threats to the American way of life are eradicated once and for all, we will continue to torture and demolish them. This is our history, a history of violence that at one time very long ago ran through the veins of every pre-American citizen that existed before this colony was even established. We are all of us violent, destructive, terrifying beings. This is a fact, a historical one. So shouldn't we use these urges, these uncontrollable historical phenomenon that we cannot escape, no matter how hard we try, these cycles of violence that swing back and forth over us in all their horrifying glory? Shouldn't we be using them to stamp out the heartless, vile, torturous individuals that threaten to undo the delicate balance that we have created for ourselves? Tell me, without this, what else are we to do with it? He had them in the palm of his hand, and all across the American landscape, every single one of them erupted with furious vigor.